What's up, wrestling fans? Two Bros Wrestling Show, very special edition coming at you tonight. Kevin, what's happening, brother?
How can you tell it's a special edition, Doug? It looks the same to me.
Same as always, right?
Halloween means mask. And of course, wrestling, that means, lucha mask. Here with Ultimate Duggo, happy to have a Halloween special topic for tonight. And that is, can we blade now? We're going blood and guts, Doug, in our main event
Let's do
topic.
it. Blood and guts.
But before we do blood and guts, we got to do a little bit of news. Hitting that opening bell. Starting out
Let's
this
hit it.
week with some good news regarding viewership of Raw. In our streaming era, it's just not easy to determine viewership or success as it was in the days of like rating battles, if you remember the weekly numbers coming in for the Monday Night
Right.
Wars. But still, we need to have some data from Ampere and that is very important for WWE and TKO. It shows that viewers are more after one-off sporting events than they are after regular WWE Raw broadcasts. That obviously
Mhm.
makes WWE programming very valuable to its new partner, Netflix. Netflix
Yeah.
was slow to embrace the world of sports and live events. This new data is showing that one-offs like boxing, they do big numbers. Subscribers just don't stick around. Compare that to the weekly programming WWE offers, the fact that viewers are staying subscribed and consuming that content. According to Ampere's data, WWE content, including Raw, special events, and other shows, that has compiled more than 300 million viewing hours on Netflix in the first half of 2025 alone. And only Raw streams on the platform in the US, but in other global territories, WWE streams episodes of SmackDown, premium live events, and even the PLEs, or the premium live specials as well.
Mhm.
So if you take that 88.6 million hours of just Raw, looking at that, if you rate that out as episodic, an episodic season, it would rank third amongst all TV shows in that period of time on
Nice.
Netflix. So when you consider that Raw is only available to around 52% of global Netflix customers, that is a very impressive feat.
That is very impressive. And it makes sense for like sports, live sports anyway, because how many people hit it and then quit it, just get in for the special event, that one off
Yeah,
and then cancel. With Raw, you need to keep coming back every week.
I want to see that fight. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm letting my 99. I mean, I guess what is it per month now or something? It's something relatively low. Yeah, if you want to see week, you
Hmm.
can't let that happen. Doug, is some impressive WWE streamer news, and that is WWE's first PLE on ESPN was. I mean, there's no way else to look at it but an
Hmm.
unmitigated failure. Not just creatively, though it was that too. Anyone that
Hmm.
actually watched that pay per view, WrestlePalooza, which was a dumb name.
If only they called it WrestlePalooza, it would have been much better.
They doomed it with that name.
They
It
did.
only added 100 to 125,000 subscribers for ESPN's new streaming service. Meltzer reported that if every month ends up similar to this initial one, then WWE's added value to ESPN would be worth or something along the lines of 35 million a year, not the
Mm.
325 million
Wow.
a year that ESPN is spending just to see a return of 35 million in revenue. So coming from those WWE events, that's greatly overpaying for what you're getting back in return. So
Hmm.
right now, it's a loss leader for ESPN, but also the reason so many streaming services have been hemorrhaging money for years. Companies go into these deals hopeful that if they overspend now, that down the road they'll continue to add all these millions and millions of subscribers and hike the prices up to a point that they will eventually be able to afford all that they're spending and turn a profit. But it is a calculated gamble. And at least out of the gate, it doesn't look like it's going to be paying off for ESPN for quite some time.
And it seems like a rough deal to get started there because WrestlePalooza kind of came from out of nowhere. It's like, oh, you know what? We're going to ESPN now. Come on with us. I'm not sure if that was to go ahead and some arrogance on the WWE part to think they could go ahead and bring their audience over and one of those, hey, look what we can do moments, or what. But I thought that transition was really clumsy. Maybe in the next few months we see those numbers build, but I don't think that's happening right now.
I think you make an excellent point. It happened so fast that many wrestling fans probably didn't have time to react. Like, I don't know if I want this or not. I'm
Right.
going to just skip this one because it does feel like it's rushed and
Hmm.
I'm already in on Peacock. And do I want to cancel Peacock? And do
Right.
I want a new subscription? I was in that boat. I'm like, I don't know that I want to do it this fast. So I'll just wait and see how things play out. And I imagine many other wrestling fans were doing the same thing. The FOMO is going to set in, though, if you get
It is.
more and more of these, you start getting towards Royal Rumble and WrestleMania and the ones you don't want to
Right.
miss, you got some decisions that you'll have to be forced to make.
Yep. Absolutely.
Because Duggo here, if we go to without mentioning Vince, let's do a Mr. McMahon story for Doug. What
Right.
do you say?
Let's do it.
This past summer in Vince's home state of Connecticut, Vince was in an accident that it was ruled that he caused. Did you hear about this, Doug?
I did indeed.
He was charged with reckless driving after wrecking his Bentley and damaging two other cars. No one was injured, and now Vince has been allowed to enter a pre-trial program to resolve the issue. The other drivers involved
What?
did not object to Vince's application for a pretrial
Hmm.
program, and Vince did show up to the brief hearing. The state superior court judge ruled that Vince could enter the program if he made a $1,000 charitable donation and only
Oh,
drove
well.
if he was properly licensed and insured. If he does that, the reckless driving charge and another charge of following too closely will be dismissed in a year. As for how Vince will come up with $1,000, Doug has started a GoFundMe, and you can contact him directly if you want to give. He'll put the number on the screen
It'll be
for
in
you.
the descriptions below. Absolutely. We got to help this guy out. He
For
is
Vince.
going through rough times. Come on, man.
Oh my gosh. Hey, an update on a former AEW star, rather, that we have not heard anything about in quite some time. Marco Stunt is no longer in the wrestling
Ah,
game, but
what?
have you thought about Marco in a while? I hadn't.
Actually, I had since Jurassic Express is back on the scene. I'm like, you know what? I miss Marco Stein.
Well, you can. Good luck, Doug. You can go see him just in
Oh,
his new line of work. Stunt,
oh,
whose real name is Noah Nelms, is now a car salesman at Homer Skeleton Ford, where he goes by the nickname Mr. Funsize. So, if you want to get into a new or used car and you live anywhere near
oh,
Olive Branch, Mississippi, go give Marco some love.
huh. Okay. Stan Douglas
Uh,
is a target manager. Marco Stone is selling cars. Okay.
it's a crazy world, my friend.
It is.
Um, some news here about the documentary series Wrestlers for those of us like Doug and I who enjoyed it tremendously. I realize we still have the opening bell on the screen. Oh, what am I doing here?
Oh,
Like I'm an amateur. Haven't done this before. Back to
come on,
Wrestlers.
man.
Get with it. It's the mask. It
It
takes out the
is.
peripheral vision.
At least
But
I don't have my glasses on, so I have an excuse, but I'm not pushing the buttons.
for those of us who enjoyed this series and thought it was dead after Netflix didn't pick it up for a second season, this documentary
Boo.
about Ohio Valley Wrestling might have a second life. Filming has begun for a second season of the show or a similar OVW project. It may not necessarily be known as Wrestlers, but they're filming a second season following OVW. They're producing it themselves, filming it independently, and are currently seeking distributors to sell it to. Radio host Matt Jones, who was previously a majority owner of OVW and who was featured very heavily in season 1 of Wrestlers, sold some of his stake in the company. And so it's very
Oh
likely
no.
that any season 2 is prominently going to feature this sale, Matt stepping out, new ownership. It was so entertaining. And
It
when you see
was.
how an independent, how these folks live and work to try to make it on a weekly basis, what they do, it was very enlightening. I hope that season 2 is picked up by somebody.
Absolutely. I love that show. And just to see Al Snow functioning at like, the high level, like, Triple H, Vince McMahon of an organization and making those calls, very, very interesting.
Very interesting. And then we'll end tonight's news segment with YouTube TV's current fight with Disney. It is a common story
No.
of a standoff between cable slash streaming companies and network slash content owners. Customers like us are in the middle. This particular fight is coming to a head this week, and it could have some serious implications for wrestling fans. Disney and Google, which are YouTube TV's owners, are racing against the clock to work out a new carriage agreement to keep Disney's mini channels on YouTube TV before the current deal expires this Thursday. The two giants are fighting over bundling and the integration of streaming. Without a resolution, YouTube TVs may lose ABC, Disney Channel, ESPN, Freeform, National Geographic, and others this week. So what does all this have to do with wrestling, you ask? According to many reports, at the heart of these negotiations lies Disney's new ESPN Unlimited streaming service. ESPN Unlimited, as most of you are keenly aware, is the new home for WWE PLEs and other WWE content. And depending on how these negotiations shake out, YouTube TV customers may gain access to ESPN Unlimited as part of their subscriptions. This is already the case for Hulu plus Live TV subscribers, as well as many cable package subscribers. Disney wants YouTube to absorb the cost of adding ESPN Unlimited as part of this agreement. YouTube TV execs are arguing that the service would inflate their base package price. As a YouTube TV subscriber myself, I am just hoping for an agreement that keeps my price close to what it is while adding access to WWE PLEs without me having to have another subscription service that I don't necessarily want. But if they make it part of my package and absorb a little bit of the price, it might end up making it close enough to what I was already spending to add on Peacock that I might have it more palatable. So we will keep an eye on this because this is kind of big. YouTube TV is by far the largest live streaming service package. And if they get access to WWE pay-per-views as part of their subscription, obviously that is going to add a lot more customers potentially for WWE PLEs. Maybe you won't have those terrible WrestlePalooza numbers going forward if this works out.
Let's hope not. Let's hope
Fingers crossed.
let's hope ESPN sees some return on their investment and all the folks out there get, access to these PLEs some way.
Access. Absolutely. And with that, we're going to switch now to our main event where we are going to bring some blood and guts onto the scene, talking about, can we bleed now? It's a gory topic just right for the spooky season. And it's actually a topic that we covered once before on this show. If you go way back in the archives, I'm saying 4 or 5 years ago, it's time to revisit it. 2 reasons. One, Doug was unable to make that broadcast, so he didn't get a way in. But 2, there's a lot that's changed when it comes to blood and its use in professional wrestling from when we did our first show, when one company used it as a practice and the other company steadfastly did not, to the fact that both of the major companies now do blading, but they do it in very different ways. So this is a great to revisit the pros and cons of blading and what the rather barbaric practice means for the world of wrestling and our thoughts on it. Let's just start and insult anyone's intelligence watching this, but for those who maybe are not aware of how people get color, as they say in the business, it is done by inserting usually a small, what they call a gig, or it's a basic little razor blade or something that is on the person of one of the wrestlers that person either, if they're comfortable, cuts themselves, usually on the forehead, or if they don't feel very comfortable doing that, the opponent, who might be more seasoned, might actually cut the other performer. I know that sounds barbaric, and if you didn't know that that's how it was done or thought it was blood capsules, you're probably not alone. I'm sure that there are many people who probably at first think that. Let's go all the way back, though. When you and I were growing up, our wrestling heroes, they had foreheads that looked like topographical maps. So
Absolutely,
this
absolutely,
was
and
definitely way more common
definitely
back
way
then.
more
I mean, it's
common.
not as common now as it was back then.
Right, definitely way more common back then, and also don't forget about, getting color the hard way, because I'm sure back in the day there was a lot of color that came the hard way too. One of
Yeah.
one
Oh
of
yeah.
my most, in more modern day, I think the best example of getting color the hard way is when Lesnar lays into Randy Orton with the elbows and gashes the forehead open, only to catch hell when he went backstage, because at that point in the WWE it was not looked on. You had to get stuff like that cleared, but Randy and Brock made a audible call and decided to go about it the hard way. Not the best decisions there, but it was
Which
definitely
was the
much.
way it was often done when we were kids, because that was
Yeah.
actually the old veterans were very adept at the hard way of, like,
Hmm.
if you don't want to cut yourself, Harley Race knew just how to hit you in order to open you
Hmm.
up. And it kind of goes back to how I started by saying that our old school wrestlers had topographical maps for foreheads.
Hmm.
Someone like a Ric Flair, who always had, since recently gutted tissue, if he punched just right, he knew he could get start blading again. So he didn't
Uh-huh.
always have to cut
Yeah.
himself. But that's what these guys wrestled sometimes today. Some of your bigger stars wrestle bleed on a basis. Dusty Rhodes bled on a nightly basis. Ric Flair bled
Mm-hmm.
on a nightly. If you had the bleached blonde hair, it was another reason so many
Oh
wrestlers had the
yeah.
bleached blonde hair, because it showed the blood more dramatically. And that's what it
Hmm.
is, really. It was done to add drama. Doug, do you remember, though, when you were a kid, when you first saw blood in wrestling? Do you have any
So I do have a very
remembrances?
vivid memory, although it was not a video product that I saw. You remember like the old school wrestling mags we'd pick up when we were kids? I was probably in like
Yes.
third or fourth grade, and the first time I saw wrestlers bleeding was Dusty Rhodes. Maybe it was a barbed wire match or something that he was in, because he's of course all bloodied the forehead and has this huge gash in his arm too, and it looked like it was split open. So, being the astute wrestling fan that I was and great student, I took it to my teacher and said, "Hey, is this what we're talking about in science class? Are these cells that I can see that are split open here? Is this what we're looking at?" And he was like, "Yeah, no, go sit down. That's not real." And I was like, "What do you mean? He's cut open. It's real."
I'm glad that you mentioned the wrestling magazines, because I wanted to bring them up. For those newer fans, or fans that are not quite the age of Ultimate Duggo and myself, you may not think of a time when blood wasn't seen on TV. I know I said that we bled way
Mhm.
more back in. Excuse me, we got a Lucha Cat coming through. Lucha Cat coming.
Oh, Lucha Kitty Paul.
Um, but yeah, they bled a lot more, but never on television. You didn't
Mm,
see it on Mid Atlantic or Georgia
mm-mm.
Championship Wrestling, because one, it was too gory for. Sometimes those shows came on at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever on a
Right.
Saturday,
Yeah.
and two, back then, again, hard to believe if you're a fan from the last 30 years, but we used to watch hours of just squash matches. They didn't
Mhm.
have star versus star. You went to the arena and paid for that.
Oh, absolutely.
But because blood and guts has always been, violent sells, the wrestling magazines were gory. And the bloodier the cover of the
Yeah.
magazine, the more likely young Kevin would be asking his dad, "Can I get
Same.
this?" I
Mhm.
wanted all the blood and gut magazines, and they knew that there was a strategic purpose for showcasing that on the front cover. And that's because it's a violent spectacle, and the more violent you could make it
Mhm.
look on the magazines, the more the magazines would sell. Blood leads.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Um, do you? I know, Doug. I think Rory answered this. I guess at the time, did you think, once you realized that wrestling was a work? I know at first you thought that, oh, this is real, and you got
Right.
your teacher saying no, it's not. Did you think that when you found out wrestling was not real, did you think that the blood also was not real?
At
Because
that
I
point,
did.
at that point, I was thinking, well, what the hell is wrong with these guys? How do they get away with this? How do they do these things without hurting themselves? Then I slowly realized, oh, they do hurt themselves, but they are trained to do it with the least amount of damage to themselves as possible. And then, suddenly I was like a magician trying to learn how all the other magicians do the tricks, you know?
I thought it was okay. If it's fake, then they've got theatrical blood. Someone is, taking, a capsule in their
Hmm.
hand and smashing it to their face. I'd assumed once I was in on the fact that it was a performance that the blood was also a performance. But you said magic trick, which is a great segue
Yeah.
because there was a broadcast that seems, again, it's hard to imagine this for newer fans. I know that we could be so gullible back in the day, but there was a TV special that
Oh,
famously
yeah.
aired on the secrets of pro wrestling, as if we were exposing the entire business by
Hmm.
talking about the tricks of the trade, which
Yep.
included blading. For young Kevin, this may have been the first time that I heard about the fact that, wait a minute, you're telling me this is all fake, which I
Mm.
knew, but that somehow the blood is real. And then there was something that made it even more um, forbidden, alluring, um, impressive that these guys, okay, you may not be actually competing, but you've got to be either a sadist or just a legitimately tough guy, or both. That you're actually
Hmm.
cutting yourself for the sake of a performance and bleeding on purpose.
Right.
That's insane.
Right.
That's insane.
You talk about your ultimo a performance artist at that point, because that's what I've always said. These are highly athletic stuntmen at the end of and women at the end of the day, who put their bodies on the line over and over and over and try and do it in the safest way possible. But still, they're jumping off not buildings, good lord, but they're jumping off 20-foot towers or ladders or whatever, and they're taking blades and cutting themselves open.
Cutting themselves open, which is absolutely insane. Um, and has been a controversial thing, I guess, from the get go, but especially the more that we learn about bloodborne illnesses and things. And
Hmm.
that's maybe where, if we're going to talk about blading today, we need to talk about how we got from the bloodbaths of the 60s to 70s to, the change in perception over the years. For the
Sure.
most part, wrestling was such a protected business that no one ever publicly admitted, kayfabe. You didn't admit that even it was,
Right.
fake. It was a performance. So you certainly didn't act like the blood was a practice that you were actually doing on purpose.
Hmm.
Um, but it became more rare in the late 80s when AIDS scared everyone. And then Hulkamania comes along around the same time, and WWF at the time starts leaning heavily into family friendly entertainment. So they
Hmm.
began to not blade. It's one of the reasons that NWA stood out to Doug and I as a kid, is that
So true.
they still looked violent, whereas WWF looked cartoony. And part of that, let's be frank, it had a lot to do with barbed wire matches, cage matches, blood.
Hmm.
Um, so it stayed this way until things changed a bit more in the 90s. It was used in the 90s, but just wasn't the bloodbath of the 70s and the 80s. It was more sparing. And then that's why, Stone Cold doesn't look like Ivan Koloff, or The Rock doesn't have a disfigured head the way that Dusty Rhodes did. But even it was used in the 90s, early 2000s when it really changed. And that's when F, as the last WWE at this point, 2008, they're the last big promotion still standing, and they went with a more strict no blood policy with their launch
Hmm.
of their PG era. It is also when accidental blood was usually handled by refs and medics, stopping the match and try to stop the bleeding on the spot, or have cameras cut away
Hmm.
at angles that did not show everything happening up close. This doesn't mean that
I
blading
had
went away,
forgotten.
obviously.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'd completely forgotten about that, but that's a memory that I didn't know I was locked away when they would actually try and stop matches and get towels and try and stop it on the spot. Forgotten
Do
about
you
that
remember?
completely.
Do you remember how fans would react when it would happen
Yeah.
too?
Ooh, they
There was
weren't
no
saying boo.
no. It was no sympathy for the fact that someone was
Hmm.
legitimately hurt. It was we have decades of seeing people bleed, and now you're trying to sell Hell in a Cell without blood, or
Hmm.
somebody accidentally gets popped in the mouth, starts bleeding, and you're stopping the
Yep.
match. Come on. Um,
Come on.
Blading did still happen in smaller areas of the wrestling world. Folks like TNA, ROH, and other smaller promotions kept the practice going. But
Hmm.
it was former ROH world champion Nigel McGuinness who took a very public stand against blading,
Yep.
saying it was outdated, unnecessary. And part of the reason he was doing this is that Nigel had contracted hepatitis B during his time in TNA. And while he doesn't know he contracted it, he will swear he knows how he didn't contract it. And that was through
Hmm.
sexual contact or sharing of needles or some of the other ways. So he kind of eliminated every way except exposure to bodily fluids like blood and things. And
Hmm.
he talks in his documentary, which I do recommend, that some of these promotions, especially some of the hardcore promotions, had these blood-soaked mats covered in still. He was afraid to even do a forward roll, he would say, because the blood and the bits of glass, and just he was
Hmm.
afraid of hurting himself. And there's no telling for sure if that is how he contracted Hep B. But once you have it for the rest of your life. And so he became basically an evangelist, an opponent against the blading, and wishing that it would be banned, just like the big guys are doing in WWE. It should be
Hmm.
banned everywhere, which is why it's a bit ironic in some ways that Nigel McGuinness now is one of the lead commentators for the promotion that brought blading back to the mainstream wrestling business.
Yeah, yeah, there is a bit of irony there, especially with Nigel. With Nigel stepping back in the ring now, but things have definitely changed, and I'm sure Nigel has it in every contract for every match that he is actually in now, very spelled out. And I bet if we were to see somebody get color in one of Nigel's matches, even though they are few and far between, that we would see that old school stoppage of the match right then and there. No black gloves with the ref checking on somebody, but a stoppage of the
Yeah.
match. Because I bet is written into his contracts for any time he does get in the ring.
Well, I mean, once you do have Hep B, you have it for life. So if
Right?
Nigel was accidentally busted open, I mean, he would pose a danger to his opponent. So they probably should
Hmm.
stop the match right then and there. It's not worth
Yeah.
a lifelong illness just for the entertainment of a TV audience. So I wouldn't blame him for that. I do think
Hmm.
that we have more standards and practices in place, the big companies, than certainly there was in the old days. You will see bloodbaths now, but after that occurs on the big stage anyway, the crews immediately take the canvas up, put down a fresh canvas. It's not the same as in the old days where every match would have blood, and by the end of it in Mid Atlantic, if you're in match 10, you have at least 7 or 8 other guys' bloods mixed into onto the mat that you're rolling around
Hmm.
in. Those days are a thing of the past. Now that we've learned a whole lot more about how diseases can be transferred and how unsafe the is. That doesn't
Hmm.
fighting is safe. You bleeding intentionally on a human being and potentially even fans in the audience when you're fighting at ringside. There is a definite risk to allowing blood to flow intentionally. It's one thing if it happens by so where we are now, Doug, is to say AEW brought it back, and then there was this stark difference, and that was where we were when we did this show last time, is to blade or not to blade. AEW
Hmm.
did, and they reveled in the fact that, hey, look at us.
Oh yeah.
We're the old NWA, and the
Hmm.
WWE is the old WWF with Hulk Hogan. Like, it's not violent, it's
Yep.
not manly, it's not tough. And so in 2024, though, things changed. And very quietly, once the old man was gone, WWE began allowing blading under certain circumstances. And now when they do it, they usually call attention to it. They close up on it.
Hmm.
They use it more sparingly than the opposition, but they do use it. So where are we with this? Is it barbaric? Is it necessary? Is it outdated, like Nigel says, even though his promotion is the one that does it the most? Or is the WWE middle ground of less is more the right way to go about it?
So, talking about this shift, yeah, Vince goes away. And there's this shift, but I really wonder if WWE would have the attitude that they do now if there wasn't a champion behind the scenes about it. And, I can't help but think that Cody, because remember, Cody seemed to be blading in every match he was doing, especially with the bleach blonde hair that he has, because it creates such a great visual. But there was a time when every time you would turn around, Cody would go out to the mat, they'd cut away to the opponent, and you're like, okay, Cody's going to come up with color. And I wonder if Cody was championing that behind the scenes. And to your other point, is it barbaric, like Nigel says? I think there are other ways to do it, like you referred to earlier. There's plenty of stage tricks, where they do live plays, which they could incorporate into the gimmicks, the spots, and have the fake blood a whole lot easier than just you know breaking somebody open, and definitely like drinking blood like Hangman did to Swerve, because that's, we get into some really ridiculous territory then.
If you're going to go to the extreme of showing people lick blood, drink blood, which they do,
Right.
um, if you're doing that, it should definitely be fake blood, because that is, under no circumstances is that acceptable, or is that a risk worth taking? That is a health
Right.
hazard and an unnecessary one. I would agree with that. I think my stance back when we did this show originally, and you weren't here to debate it on, is that my wife took the opposing view of
Good for
it.
her.
Yeah, she just, she's not a blood and guts fan, and it
Hmm.
isn't everyone's cup of tea. And I do think that AEW uses it probably too much and too extreme sometimes when they do. I do think that
Hmm.
Liz can be more with it. I do like the practice, and maybe it's just the era that I grew up in, as having it somewhat acceptable and endorsed as part of the business. That feels like that's part that can kind of be taken away. But I can certainly see a point of, we can use blood, and if we can make it look the same without actually having people hurt themselves or
Hmm.
put themselves at risk, I would be for that too. I don't know that I necessarily need an actual barbed wire bat cutting someone open to give that blood. If I
Right.
can do it, if it can be done in a way that looks the same. I tell you though, what I don't like, and that is that barbed wire bat being used and no blood coming because we aren't allowed to play.
Yes.
Then let's
Right.
just not use the bat, and let's not use the barbed wire, because it'd be like having a horror movie where someone is, cut or slashed or, stabbed, and there is no blood produced. Then it
Right.
just then becomes unrealistic. And I would
Well, and
prefer blood over unrealism.
And that's just it. When two men are engaged in what we could consider a blood feud, where these men hate each other, they're going to have a last man standing. They're going to take each other to the limits, to where they are going to have to beat their opponent to within an inch of their life, so they can't stand back up. Yet there's no blood, there's no bruising, there's just somebody like that looks a little tired, exhausted maybe, and they can't get back up. They stagger around, they fall back down, the other guy wins. That it makes sense in a case like that to do some sort of stage blood. Absolutely. I don't think people do need to be cutting themselves open in 2025, but I think there are alternatives to tell the story.
You mentioned Cody. I mean, yeah, he had the blonde hair, the bleach blonde
Hmm.
hair. And not only did he come from a company that sort of built its differentiator as, we're the ones that bleed, the other guys don't, but
Hmm.
what dad was. Um,
Right.
Look at Dad's view of the business and how often Dusty Rhodes, you picture Dusty, you picture him with that big giant bruise that was always on his
Hmm.
side, and blood streaming down his face, because that was his booking philosophy. That was how old
Yeah.
school matches were built. I understand that it is barbaric. There's no doubt about it. From the time I was a kid and found out that they were actually taking razor blades to their own foreheads, I thought, that is sick, and that is
What
the
is
toughest thing I have ever heard. That
right?
these guys would do this to entertain. How cool is that? And I guess that is probably an outdated old man way of looking at it. If you can do it now in a way that makes that unnecessary, I could
Hmm.
I could probably cut off on the practice going to the wayside. I'm sure that for some, especially those with the old school mindset or those few folks that still worked in the end of the territory days, those veterans that
Right.
were around then, that probably think that it's a badge of honor to be able
Hmm.
to be, it's another thing to show that you are a tough old timer is that back in my day, this is what we did. We wrestled twice on Sundays, 6 days a week, traveled
Right.
like, drank like fish, did all the
Hmm.
drugs and cut ourselves open every night. And you all are a bunch of wussies.
Yep. And you all sit in your RVs and play video games.
Yeah. Wrestle on TV only. House shows are a thing of the past, and no one asked you to get color. It's something we didn't
Hmm.
mention. Back in the day, getting color usually meant an extra $25 to $50 on
Right.
your pay. So, guys, the reason that there was blood in 10 out of 10 of the matches is that you weren't making the same amount of money the guys today make. But if you're making an extra, $50 a night, 7 nights a week by cutting
Right.
yourself, you cut yourself on Sunday and you just open it up for 6 straight days and you've made a couple extra $100 take home that week. Again,
Hmm.
I know just spelling it out like that sounds completely sadistic and barbaric, and I guess
But
it is.
but it's the way it was, and I'm glad that it doesn't happen as often, but I still do think there's reason for it to happen story-wise. I think it makes sense in some stories, but I think there's clearly safer ways to do it with stage props, stage blood. I mean, everything should be gimmicked at this point, not big giant two by fours, with rusty nails in them, piercing a man's backside, but you know,
So let's
everything
outline our
should be gimmicked.
differences. Let's outline our differences here and then some commonalities I think that we have. While you and I may differ slightly on whether or not blading, the practice of cutting oneself, is okay or not. And I totally understand your argument and realize that mine is in an old school mindset that it
Right.
is probably outdated. Put those differences aside, that we both, I think, are in agreement that much like if it was a movie or TV show, there are times
Hmm.
when blood is necessary for a story, for the story to make
Absolutely.
sense. And
Absolutely.
maybe that commonality that we have is a good place to go with the next part of this conversation. And that is who's doing that part of it right, whether it ends up being theatrical blood or blading. I mean, we started by saying in the old days, they bled all the time, but never on TV. Here in a couple of
Hmm.
weeks, AEW is having a regular Wednesday night dynamite that is titled
Blood and
Blood and
guts.
Guts, which
Mhm.
means they're going to just let it flow as they have in the past on network television. Which again, I'm not one of those somebody think of the children I know kids
Right.
watch and that sort of thing. But do you feel that if they went back to the old days of saving it for PLEs, pay-per-views, blood feuds, as opposed to having it on a Saturday night on Collision or Monday night on Raw, do you think that the impact would be more if you stopped seeing it on TV and you only saw it once every 5-6 months on a pay-per-view and a big feud?
I definitely do because then you're into that feature attraction, kind of like Brock Lesnar. When Brock shows up, it's a big deal because he's that feature attraction kind of thing. Same thing there. It doesn't make sense to go out and continually do like these PLE pay-per-view level matches week after week after week on free TV. And I've got to say that's something AEW is really, I mean, good for us because we're fans. We want to see
Yeah,
these high level matches and these high level performances. But AEW is very bad about giving the cow away for free. Is that a saying? Well, it is
yeah.
now. So but they're really bad about that. And the same thing with their blood and guts stuff. I mean, we don't see blood and guts weekly on TV, but they're going to give away what should be a PLE and say, here you go. Here's a whole bunch of John Moxley, getting sliced open with pizza cutters or whatever.
I think it's why buy the cow when you get the milk for free, but point
Sure,
taken.
I'm giving away the whole cow apparently. So does AEW.
um, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I think that AEW gives away too much, and I do think that they do the blood feud better. I really think that AEW knows that when two men hate each other in a storyline,
Hmm.
that it should end in a way that is
Definitely.
uncomfortable at times. I think they lean on it too much though, because everybody hates each other. It always ends that way. There's certain wrestlers that will always bleed, and they may be doing it on
Hmm.
Wednesday, on Saturday, and then on the pay-per-view again on Sunday. And I do
Right.
think that over time, there's a reason why. And again, I know times have changed. It was a simpler time, but when you never saw blood on TV, and then you saw your favorite wrestler on the newsstand bleeding like a stuck pig,
Hmm.
you gravitated to that image because it was shocking.
Yeah.
I don't think you can. I mean, I do think whether you're blading or whether it's theatrical blood, I think the visual violent aspect of wrestling can be shocking if you lead it up to a point of shock. If it's
Hmm.
all the time and every week, it stops being shocking, and then it becomes way more unnecessary and way more of a risk that is an unnecessary risk if it no longer comes with the shock value, which is what you're supposed to be going for.
It essentially means nothing. It's just like a headlock at that point. It's just another tool in the toolkit that you see in every match. It's that collar and elbow hookup at that point.
If you didn't have Swerve Strickland actually, going all vampire, would you remember
Mhm.
that match as much? Which is why, if you go to the point that how can we shock people now that blood alone doesn't do it? Well, now we have to have them drinking the blood. You've probably gone on a slippery slope where you've
Hmm.
pushed it so far that you have to think of outlandish, unnecessary ways to make it shocking again, when really all you would need to do is pull back on how often you feature it, and eventually it would become shocking again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense in a match like that with Swerve and Hangman, with everything that was at stake, with everything they had gone through up to that point. And when I say it makes sense, I don't mean the drinking of the blood, but I mean the blood in the match itself.
Right. Yeah. And I guess maybe to bottom line, my opinion on it in the modern day, if you go back and look at our original, and it was a Halloween show, if you go looking back at our original topic on blading, back when AEW bladed and WWE didn't, I don't remember how strong I came down on it, but I'm sure it was some variation of, I like that AEW has the old school mindset of sometimes blood is
Hmm.
necessary. And I probably condemned WWE at the time for having matches that should draw blood, extreme rules, pay-per-views, and things that made no sense if you were going to ban
Hmm.
the practice altogether. I would think that I have evolved in the same way that the two companies have evolved, and would now say for me that AEW overdoes it, and that WWE taking the less is more approach, allowing it back as part of the narrative and trying to make it shocking by limiting how often it happens. I think WWE has probably taken the approach that I would most prefer, and that is less is more.
I I'm going to have to agree with you because had I been on that show, I would have leaned into the opinion you had at the time. And now I think WWE does have a very good balance, and I am certain, like I saw on X, I haven't watched SmackDown yet this week, but I saw on X this morning as I was scrolling through before I get rolled out of bed, where Nikki Cross just starts bleeding profusely from her mouth. I don't know if that was from this week or something, or something else I missed, but clearly she had bit down on a blood capsule and just starts spewing blood. And I'm like, okay, that's how you do things like that. She clearly didn't just bite her tongue. She didn't get color like, the hard way by biting her own tongue. But that's the way those things can be done through theatrics like that.
Did it look
Take
real
a
to
few
you?
beats. It looked real to me. It looked real enough. I mean, you
Yeah.
know,
There's always going to be the hard way. There's always going to be the accident. So blood,
hmm.
real blood, will always still be part of the sport. But if you can make it look the same and have the same effect for storyline purposes, I am fine for someone not cutting themselves and putting their health
Hmm.
and the health of fans at risk as well. Because these fights that spill out, these matches where falls count anywhere and the like, yeah, they could be dangerous to spectators if you're using real blood. So
Yeah.
I can admit that my need for violence and barbarism is outdated, and I'm just sick. I'm sick in the head apparently. What can you
It's
do?
okay. It's okay.
So, what is your all's thoughts? To blade, to not blade? It might depend on the generation you grew up in, whether or not you think that it's
Definitely.
necessary, not necessary, that you like it or don't like it. Obviously, there are fans that flock to these hardcore promotions that do nothing but, and that isn't necessarily my cup of tea all the time, but it might be
Mm.
yours. So, it's different strokes for different folks, but this is, I'm sure, a subject that's relevance will not go away, and who knows, we may do
Right.
a third one of these as we continue to evolve in the business and things continue to change. Give it 5 more years and who knows where we will be in terms of both major promotions and their current stance on blading,
Indeed.
considering how they've evolved quite frequently through the years. If you go back and look at the
Hmm.
history, it's never been a constant, it's always changing.
Always changing.
And with that, Doug, we'll do a
Big fit.
quick
Let's
Halloween
do
big
it.
finish. Um, it's the holiday. I won't keep it light by saying I don't have a real botch other than to say YouTube TV, Disney, don't take everything away from us in this game of chicken. Figure it out. Give us the PLEs. Until that happens, the fact that PLEs are costing way more than they did in the Peacock era, way more than the WWE Network era, that's a botch. Let's get that resolved for a vast majority of customers with some sort of resolution this week.
And I'll add to that for a light botch myself and say, let's respect those ticket prices too for those PLEs and things like that.
Heck yeah.
TKO is leaning heavy because you've got your fans paying so much out for multiple streaming services and chasing around trying to keep up with the product, and then when you do show up in a town, the prices are pretty darn steep these days. It makes it hard for a family, much less a
Oh,
couple of
yeah.
old guys to just show up and go to a pay-per-view or a PLE or even like a local event now. So
Yeah.
reevaluate that pricing,
We
please.
know we know that the ticket has been a hot one, and therefore you think you can maximize every dollar from it. But kudos to AEW for keeping their costs
Hmm.
more in line. I know it's easier to say and do that when you're not selling as many tickets,
Right.
but you
But
know, if you wanted to take the kids and have a night out, you can afford to do it, and you can't to a
hmm
WWE PLE right now.
nope.
Performer or performance of the week, Doug? Do you have somebody?
You know what? I've missed this. I haven't called him out for a couple of weeks, and I've said this before, and it's appropriate that we're both in lucha masks. But the stuff that Penta and Dom have going on Raw the past couple of weeks has been just chef's kiss perfect, especially Dom. So shout out to Dom for performer, and I'll just give it to Penta and Dom for the past 2 weeks. The stuff they've been doing on Raw is just amazing, especially the attention to detail that Dom has, where he's not only working. It's a Halloween episode, so we might as well call it out. He's cosplaying as Eddie Guerrero. The mullet, the mustache. He's lying, he's cheating, he's stealing, and the fans love it. Said it
Yeah, they
before,
do.
they have a Dom problem. They are going to eventually have to turn him face, or at least that Eddie Guerrero babyface where he's lying, cheating, and stealing, and still, getting the fans to pop for him. But if you haven't seen these things, just go back. You can grab them on YouTube. There's a great Stevie Richards. He's done the past 2 weeks. He's called out Dom on what went right, and he breaks it down so perfectly. Things you probably missed if you were just absorbing it as part of the show, and go back and watch it and see a breakdown of these matches and everything that Dom and Penta and even Rusev, they all do right, even down to the camera work. It's kudos to Dom and crew.
Hey, Dom is killing it right now. He just is absolutely killing it. Someone else who's killing it, and it is my performance of the week, and that is one Blake Monroe, aka Mariah May from back in the day. Obviously, in AEW, the work she did with Tony Storm brought her to international attention and really raised her profile from an international talent who, honestly, when she showed up on AEW, I was like, okay, it's a pretty face. I don't know what's behind it. And then you realize, oh, yeah, She's got character
Mhm.
work. She's got in-ring ability. And she
Right.
took that big platform to a bigger platform by signing with WWE. And very, very
Mhm.
quickly, she's become one of the highlights of Tuesday nights. Last night on Halloween Havoc, she captured her first WWE gold already. So she is the new
Oh,
actually the new NXT North American Women's Champion,
okay.
and did so in over Zarya, who was defending the title for Sol Ruka, who was injured and couldn't defend. And so that sets up some storyline between the
Yeah.
best friends that, you tried to carry the water for me and couldn't. There's tension there, and Blake, of course, just rises to the top and has always kind of stolen the scene whenever she's been in an angle. And the fact that she's already a champion after just a short period of time on NXT shows that the WWE has high hopes for her future, and rightfully so. She is someone that you would put your money on. They're smart to do so.
Yeah. Cool.
Match of the week, Doug. I know we just had a
Uh-huh.
show on Thursday,
Right.
uh, but have you seen anything good that you'd like to call out?
Like I said, I just got to call out the stuff that Ray and Penta have been doing on Raw because I think, especially if you can go back, maybe I should be giving a shout out to Stevie Richards for pointing these things out to me that I didn't catch the first time through. But just watching the breakdown of those matches and everything that literally goes right and how good these men are at their jobs, it's really astounding, especially Dom. So, just for the platform to let Dom be so excellent at what he does, and Penta, of course, is excellent at what he does as well. The character work, everything in those matches, just go back and watch Ray and Penta, or not Ray, nope. Ray's his dad, Dom and Penta. The past couple of, I know, and I've got the Ray Phoenix mask on, but you go back and check it out. These matches are great.
For me, I am going back to the NXT women's division because it is, I think, the best women's division in all of wrestling. And last night on Halloween Havoc, you saw several examples of just how good it is, including my match of the week, which was JC Jane defending the NXT Women's Championship against Tatum Paxley. Tatum Paxley is your new WWE NXT Women's Champion, and it was a heck of a match. And again, shows off the depth of NXT's women's division, where so many of those ladies could easily show up on Raw and SmackDown, and very well maybe, on their way to. Tatum Paxley's been
Mhm.
around for a bit and hasn't ever had the focus that she probably deserved, especially with how good her character work has been with the culling. And now she's the champion. So it looks like there maybe is a chance for JC Jane to move on with Fatal Influence to the main roster, if that's the way they choose to go, and then center NXT around a brand new champion, which opens up all kinds of possibilities for new match combinations they've yet to explore on the NXT brand. Just absolutely great stuff going on there right now. And the match they put on was fantastic. Highly recommend if you haven't seen it. Check out all Halloween
Awesome.
Havoc. Ricky Saints and Trick Williams tore down the house at the end of the show as well, but that is the match that stood out to me the most.
Cool. To check it out.
Check it out. And speaking of checking it out, Doug, we're about ready to check out, but we hope
What?
everyone else checks back in with us next week. We have some
Oh,
great topics leading off the month of November, as you've seen scrolling across the bottom of our screen. Actually, more
back
lucha
you.
stuff. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
going
I
lucha
see
again
this.
next week.
Yeah.
So you want to check that out, and however you're watching, either on YouTube or our Facebook channels, live or on demand, we appreciate you. Subscribe, like, comment, let us know what you think. And as always, come
Thank
back
you
and
for
see us in
watching.
Lucha Bros.
Go watch some wrestling.
See ya.